Welcome to Dr Joe Unplugged. This podcast contains general information and is not in any way medical advice. Ultra-processed foods. Good, bad, ugly, indifferent? Really good question. And for reasons which one could speculate on, we'll see how we go, whether I end up deciding to speculate on it or not, very much back in the news. Yeah, why not? RFKJ, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I'm going to tell people anything they don't know. He has joined forces with Donald Trump. I express no opinion on that, but has raised the issue of the health of Americans. And to be fair, the issues that he is talking about with diet and ultra-processed foods are a factor worldwide in the developed world, not so much in the developing world. The United States, Western Europe, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, all facing increased rates of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, obesity, overweight, a whole host of chronic conditions, and that includes some cancers as well. And whether or not one agrees with RFK Jr.'s politics, that's for all of you as listeners to decide whether you do or you don't. But it doesn't really matter in terms of what he's talking about when he says the health of Americans has not been on the radar of either side of politics. And that's quite true. And it's not on the radar of either side of politics in any of those jurisdictions that I've mentioned. And his point where he says, and he is, I think, close to 70, that when he was a child, when his uncle was president, very few Americans, and again, this applies more broadly, had a chronic disease, and now 6 or 7 out of 10 have one. Virtually no children had a chronic condition, and now it's getting towards 40%. And that nobody is asking why is a very, very telling point. And the cost is enormous because the approach has been, what do we do to treat it? And typically we do that with pharmaceuticals or in different instances surgery, and there's an absolutely legitimate role for all of that. But if nobody is asking why have we seen these increases, what has changed in 60 years, then we're just going to keep treating the end result without reducing the incidence. And we hear a lot about, the war on cancer. Cancer rates are projected to go up rather than down into 2050. Now, some of that could be because it's an ageing population, but some of it could also be that we are not addressing root causes. And maybe we're not addressing root causes because we're not actually looking for them. And I think it is very fair to say that our genetics have not changed materially in 60 years. Whatever else one might point to, that is not it. It just doesn't change that quickly. Are we better at detection? Yeah, we are. We look at rates of autism. It could be argued quite correctly that we're better at recognising it and more likely to do so today than 50 years ago. Rates of autism have gone in the United States from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 26. Apparently the rate in California is 1 in 22. That is a massive increase, and I do not think can be explained by better recognition alone. Something else is going on. And that something else might not be just one factor as well. We tend to be very reductionist in medicine and assume there must be one cause. There could be multiple causes. All right, back to where we started. If we put diesel fuel into a car that runs on 98 unleaded, it's not going to go very well. It's not the fuel that is suitable for that car. And you're going to find that that car may not run at all, or you're going to be up for very, very expensive repairs. When we go to the supermarket, a lot of us, and partly this is because we've been misled, in my opinion, a lot of us are effectively putting into our supermarket trolleys foods that are not suitable for us as human beings. 100 years ago, people didn't have this problem. Now, immediately the argument goes, oh, our ancestors didn't live as long as we did. That's quite correct. They didn't die of type 2 diabetes or of cancer. Thousands of years ago, people were hunters and gatherers. There wasn't a lot of food, so they're more likely to die from lack of food, exposure to the elements, cold in particular. They might have been killed by enemies or predators. So that's why they died younger. And yes, if they got an overwhelming infection with a bacteria, they didn't get an antibiotic, so that could also kill them if they cut themselves and it got infected. So there's a lot of reasons why people died at a younger age that are not to do with diet. All right. If you have somebody who lived really up until about the 1960s and 70s, and they came back today and wandered around a supermarket, their first question would probably be, what is in all these boxes? And you're going to say to them, well, that's food. And they're going to say, well, that's odd-looking food. Not because they're stupid or idiots, but the notion of food was something which grew in the ground or was growing somewhere. So fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, berries, meat, fish, chicken, poultry. Most food didn't come in boxes and packages, and it wasn't beige food. You get a lot of coloured boxes at the supermarkets. The boxes are coloured. The food is actually quite beige because a lot of it comes from wheat and corn. So we don't actually have a very diverse diet. We have a beige diet. When we have a plate full of vegetables of different colours, that's where we get variety. Same with fruits of different colours. Ultra-processed foods have got a lot of publicity, and rightly so, because they are a new phenomenon. We did not have them in previous generations. And if we eat a little bit of them, I don't personally think it's a problem. You do get the zealots who say, none shall pass my lips, and if that's how they want to live, I take my hat off to them, good on them. Probably in our busy 21st century lives, not everybody's going to achieve that, and we don't need to. But if a lot of our diet is made up of ultra-processed foods, then that is a problem because they have a lot of additives, they have a lot of preservatives, a lot of chemicals, they've been chemically processed, they've been significantly altered from what they started out as. Even if you think about the humble cornflake compared to an ear of corn, a lot of processing has gone in to turn that ear of corn into cornflakes. It's not quite looking the same. And yes, there are also added sugars. There's not as much now, but trans fats. So a lot of components that the body doesn't need. People will say, well, surely these chemicals are safe. They're safe in as much as, no, they're not going to kill you. Obviously, they wouldn't be licensed and you wouldn't be able to eat them if they did. But that's the wrong question. If you ask if they're safe, the answer is yes. If you ask, does the body need them? Does the body have any need for preservatives or additives or added sugars or taste additives? The answer to that is no. The body doesn't need it. The body needs vitamins, minerals, essential fats, essential amino acids. It doesn't even need carbohydrates. It's the failure of the low-fat dietary guidelines that says we've got to eat more carbs. The body can make all the carbohydrate it needs. Now, it is good to get some carbs, particularly from vegetables and from whole grains. So, yeah, eat some corn on the cob, eat some nuts. But we don't need highly processed grains. Some of the breads we get these days are largely almost just white sugar. And if we don't read the labels, we don't know that. Now, what I've noticed, and it's been pointed out by a few pundits, particularly on X, is that since RFKJ came out and said we need to look at the impact of ultra-processed foods on the health of Americans, we're suddenly getting stories emerging saying, oh, they're not so bad. Somebody put on X 2 covers of Time magazine, one from last year, ultra-processed foods are bad. Don't hold me to the exact words, but very clear that was the intent. And, a couple of weeks ago, maybe they're not so bad after all. Well, what's changed in a year? The only thing that's changed is Bobby Kennedy has come out and said it's a problem, and shock horror, he's joined with Trump. And again, whether you like any of these people or not, that's not the issue. That is not the issue. The issue is, why are we now getting these stories trying to say ultra-processed foods are not so bad when previously everybody has been pretty much united in saying they're a problem? At the same time, it's not as if people are really, when I say people, I'm talking about big public health and the mainstream media, not really telling you to cut your consumption of them because there's a lot of money in it for them. I mean, everybody's going to make a living. A lot of these food companies advertise in the mainstream media, so they want to bite the hand that feeds them. A couple of other pundits have sort of opined that, in America in particular, where the pharmaceutical industry spends a lot of money on advertising, they don't do it really to promote their products. They do it to more or less buy, I'm trying to think of the best word, almost like buy protection. They're not telling the networks not to run negative stories on pharmaceuticals or question why so many people are needing to take so many medications, but because they're advertising with them, everybody knows which sides their proverbial bread is buttered on. So you end up finding that there's not as many of those stories, and they appear on independent media. And I would absolutely recommend people check out Casey Means, and she's a Stanford-trained ear, nose and throat surgeon who's written a book called Good Energy, and Martin McCary from Johns Hopkins, who's written a new book called Blind Spots, about when medicine gets it wrong. So ultimately, what we really do need to be doing, and what we're not doing enough of, is looking for causative factors in terms of why are we seeing these increased rates of chronic disease, and particularly type 2 diabetes, overweight and obesity. I don't want to call overweight and obesity diseases. They're precursors to, obviously, type 2 diabetes in a lot of people, and are risk factors for other conditions. So why is it in the space of a couple of generations that we've seen this massive increase? There are reasons out there. If we don't look for them, we won't find them. And it is fair to say that if you take 3 steps back, there is a lot of money for a lot of people and industries in not finding those answers. So this is where big public health and governments have a degree of responsibility to be looking, and they're not, which essentially means that it's up to you as an individual to look. And you don't have to look that far. If you wouldn't put the wrong fuel into your car, don't put the wrong fuel into your body. Casey Means makes a very good point when she discusses with Megyn Kelly and says the diet wars are a distraction. Whether you want to be vegan, whether you want to be carnivore, whether you want to be somewhere in between, is far, far less important than getting good nutrition, getting what the body needs, getting enough vitamins and minerals, getting the good fats, getting the good proteins, getting some fibre, and that's typically from vegetables more than from, boxes that say they have fibre in it. Again, getting some regular exercise, sleep, managing your stress. But the purposes today, focusing on the fuels. If most of what you put into your supermarket trolley, and in turn most of what you put into your mouth and the mouths of your children, are foods that until not that long ago were either growing somewhere in the ground or moving around somewhere, and if you didn't freeze them or eat them, you would need to throw them out by next week, those are the sorts of foods that you should be predominantly eating. Does it have to be 100%? No. Does it have to be organic? Look, it'd be nicer, but realistically, that's not going to be feasible for everybody. Do we want to minimise pesticides and plastics? It's a whole other discussion. Be nice, but again, focus on what you can. Start with the basics. Put the sorts of fuels and foods into your body that your ancestors, who haven't been on the planet for at least 50 years, would recognise as food. You've made a very, very big first step. Thanks for listening to Dr. Joe Unplugged. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, like and share. You can also follow it on all the socials. There'll be new content uploaded each week.